I think we would have to wait a couple of minutes to be on the time schedule.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Don't see any questions so far. Okay, one question, yes.
Thanks.
Please come to the microphone.
Are there questions?
That's good too.
Do you want to comment on the relationship between lens implants and light scattering?
Excuse me, between...
Do you want to comment on the relationship between lens implants, IOLs, and light scattering?
I'm afraid I don't know much about lens implants and how they affect scatter. But theoretically speaking, if you have structures with such as diffractive elements and lenses with edges inside there should be some glare from reflections on these edges, mostly. Or you're referring to bulk scattering from absorption of material in their surfaces.
A lot of patients complain of very odd visual dysphotopsic phenomena after cataract surgery, dark
Wow.
presence and reflections of various sorts. And also the quality of vision is much less than you'd expect, even when they've got a planar lens in. And I just wondered to what extent that's due to.
This is probably not the sort of scattering that we have been discussing in this presentation. This was mostly about bulk scattering from the material, from the cornea or the lens itself. I think what you're referring to is the combination of glare from decentered optics or tilted optics and possibly portions of the pupil that were not properly covered by the optic when the pupil is fully dilated in the dark. This is what you're referring. And I think we have a comment from...
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, it is my intention to go a little bit into that in my presentation later today. And it is indeed so that if you analyze the stray light effects of IOLs, you can see a variety of different phenomena that all cause light scattering and complaints in the patients. But there is a variety. But I will only touch on that, but I will show you quantitatively the amounts that IOLs will give, and those amounts can be significant.
Yes. I think it's okay to start. You've got 2 minutes extra.
Okay.
So this should make it easier. Please go ahead with your talk.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to guide you a little bit through the ways of how to interpret wavefront aberrations, how we can look at them in terms of wavefront measurements and other representation techniques. As well, we are going to review a little bit of the clinical measurements that are observed in normal eyes. Now, what is our intention in wavefront diagnosis? It's basically to determine the optical quality of the eye, and by intention, mainly to refractive procedures. So far, wavefront sensing is not really capable to determine the visual function of the human eye. And as you heard in the previous talk, scattering plays a dominant part in that. So I'm going to give you a bit of criteria for literature review, because the literature that's out there on wavefront sensing is sometimes rather confusing. A lot of terms are used and different kind of representation techniques. So we're going to have a little bit of a deeper insight in this. Then we're talking about the symmetry of optical aberrations, because some of the published literature and data do not care for the symmetry between the two eyes. And finally, we talk about optical aberrations in aging and the significance of corneal and total aberrations in the human eye. Well, when we're trying to look at literature, we usually focus on terms like RMS values, Strehl ratio, a kind of wavefront metrics that are representing to some degree the optical errors of the eye. However, those measurements are usually based by the subjects investigated. So The visual acuity itself is sometimes rather rarely reported in those publications, and it's difficult to define what kind of groups were studied. In wavefront sensing, the patient has to fixate the fixation light during the measurement to make sure that the system, the wavefront sensor, is aligned with respect to the line of sight to the eye, which is the interception line between the fixation light, the center of the pupil, and the fixation point on the fovea. However, it's almost never reported about the ability to fixate of the patient. And if you do daily routine in clinics with patients, some of the patients are not really able to fixate, and wavefront sensing can be questionable. Also, the exclusion criteria usually in those studies are rarely published, but they are of importance, especially if you look on wavefront measurements in patients that do have a lot of scatter. Wavefront sensors might be affected by that, and therefore the exclusion criteria must be defined clearly. As we know from corneal topography since years, is that contact lenses affect the shape of the cornea, and they have to be removed to get a good measurement. In that sense, contact lens removal before wavefront measurement is essential, especially if you're going to base a treatment on that. However, how long the contact lens is removed must be reported clearly. Also, the age range of the patient. Are we talking about younger patients that have a good ability to accommodate? Accommodation might affect the aberrations or the high order errors. So the age range must be considered when talking about wavefront sensing, as well as the refractive errors. Now, those are subject-related criteria that you know from clinical studies. However, also the study design is relevant when looking at higher order aberrations of the patients. Some of the publications, if you go through literature reviews, is that right and left eyes have not really been separated in the statistics. And we were going to see later on that due to the symmetry of the aberration, this might cause problems in the statistics. The measurement technique, some people using Hartmann-Shack sensors, others using churning systems or other techniques that are out there. It's really important to know what kind of measurement technique was used and how was the patient treated during the measurement. Was the pupil dilated? What kind of medication was used? The pupil size during the measurement and for reporting might be different. For measurement, you need quite a larger pupil, probably a dilated pupil, to achieve over a larger pupil range a lot of measurement points. However, mathematically, you can calculate the aberrations for different pupil sizes. So you can measure a wavefront over a given 7mm pupil, and you can calculate a 6, 5, or 4mm pupil easily out of the measured data. Status of accommodation, how was the fogging been done by the system? Did the observers use a kind of medication? The centration method itself, how was this device centered to the eye? And finally, how are the data represented in terms of wavefront or RMS value or maybe Strehl ratio? So, if you go into the literature, usually real acuity itself is rather good reported. I never found a good comment on the ability to fixate. Exclusion criteria are more or less moderate reported. Most of the publications do not report whether the contact lens was removed or did the patients wear contact lens at all. And the range of cylinders sometimes ignored. Usually people like to use the mean spherical equivalent, and they do not report sphere and cylinders separately. For sure, the study's design is usually excellent reported, and the number of eyes. However, if the eyes were separated in right and left, the eyes are really rarely reported. One thing that is really confusing, we're going to look at this a little more detailed, is the pupil size. And it's usually rather moderate reported how the pupil size was during the measurement and what is the calculated pupil size based on that measurements. Also, the status of accommodation, type of accommodation, or type of how the accumulation status was during the measurement is not really presented in most of the literature, especially if you go to refractive surgery procedures. The problem is that wavefront data can be represented in different ways, and some of the literature is quite unclear how they did it. Number of eyes investigated are usually pretty small in most of the publications. People do a kind of group matching to refraction and age, but it's sometimes unclear how they did it or how does this really affect the waveform measurements. And if you compare different publications from different groups, sometimes the measurements are done under complete different conditions, which makes it also difficult to compare the data. But let me give you a little bit of an overview about wavefront representation. We can separate them in terms of pupil plane representation. So we can talk about waveform maps, diode maps, RMS value, or Zernike coefficients. Another way to represent aberrations is the image plane, point spread function, modulation transfer function, or the Strehl ratio, which is the intensity maximum in an ideal eye and a diffraction limited eye versus the intensity maximum of the point spread function in an aberrated eye, which gives a factor which is 1 in a perfect eye and below 1 in an aberrated eye. Now, a lot of people like to discuss about the Zernike coefficients and how they are affected by refractive surgery procedures. Well, the nice things with Zernike is that they have a kind of correlation between values we know from clinics in terms of sphere and cylinder, that is those terms. And we have all kinds of high order aberrations that are representing kind of irregularities in the optical system. There's an infinite number of Zernikes mathematically, but practically speaking, most of the people use them up to the 4th radial order, like here, or maybe to the 6th order. Wavefront maps, like measured here in a patient's eye, can be expressed or decomposed in different Zernike modes. So we have astigmatism, defocus in terms of sphere, and we have the higher order components, which makes it very easy to separate between what is the spherical or cylindrical error of an eye versus the irregularities. Well, to give you a little bit of example how well these Zernikes represent vision, I'm going to show you some wavefront maps and the Zernike coefficients, and to give you an idea how does it look like. So that would be a perfect eye, 0 wavefront, RMS value is 0, no defocus, no sphere. This is some defocus, so we get a Z4 here, defocus of this little parabolic shape, typical wavefront of a defocus. This is a spherical aberration. We can lift this Mexican head or donut shape. We have Z12, and the RMS value is 0.5, having some spherical aberration. This is how it looks like when you combine them. You get a kind of composition of both. Now my question here is, which wavefront gives you the best vision? Or the best image quality on the eye? Any suggestions? Going back to the wavefronts, it's pretty difficult to look at the wavefront simply and say, well, this is a large wavefront error, a small wavefront error, which causes a lot of visual problems. This one here gives more or less the best image quality. Now, also people like to talk about the pupil size in wavefronts. And usually you have to dilate the pupil to get a large pupil, or you have to use darkroom conditions to get a larger pupil size, and to turn wavefront measurements over the full pupil. Now this is a spherical aberration as an example, and how does it look like? This is a cross-section through the wavefront to get this kind of sinusoidal shape over the given pupil size. If you shrink the pupil down, on a sudden this looks like more a defocus shape. If you do cross-section, you do the measurement points, you have less measurement points, What you get is a kind of a defocus shape in here. Now, the point here is, depending on the pupil size, the order of aberration can change. So if you measure an eye with a large pupil, having, for example, 7 mm pupil diameter, you probably measure spherical aberration. If you shrink the pupil, what is going to happen? You're going to change the radial order down to, let's say, defocus. So if you want to get information of the aberrations of the eye, you need a large pupil. Otherwise, you're simply measuring something in a lower order or range, and you're going to ignore the higher orders with smaller pupil sizes. Okay, so wavefront seems to be a little bit difficult. I mean, it's difficult to look at the image, how the image looks like. They are affected by kind of pupil size. So why not looking at diopters? You know, this is ophthalmology. People like to work with diopters. That's what you put in front of the eye in refractive. Now this is, again, an ideal wavefront. And this is the diopter map. It's here it's 0. This is defocus, sphere, which means we have here a constant diopter map here, 0.5 diopters over the full pupil. That's the pupil here, 6 mm diameter. This is spherical aberration, which gives you a kind of a gradient in the diopters, having here 4 diopters in the periphery, minus 2.5 diopter in the central part. This is kind of combination here between sphere and defocus. Again, you have a kind of a structure in the pupil in terms of diopters. Again, my question, which gives you the best image? Maybe this one. This is just simply sphere. Again, here, number 1 is a kind of combination between sphere and defocus. Gives the best image. Well, let's talk a little bit about the RMS value. The RMS value, this is a kind of a cross section again through the wavefront, here like a spherical aberration. The mean value would be 0 if you take a mean value over the cross section. So the RMS value takes the variance of the modulation of the wavefront within the pupil, and you simply take out the square root. So that's the definition of the RMS value. And the RMS value is pretty much the most reported value in the literature, still very frequently used. Now, the story here is the picture I've shown you so far on wavefront maps have exactly the same RMS value. Now, these are 6 different images having the same RMS value. So I truly believe the RMS value is nice to look at kinds of metrics comparing the optical changes pre-post, but doesn't give you any information about the visual performance. So pupil plane representations is difficult to interpret in terms of vision. However, it's ideal for calculating ablation profiles or acquired shape changes in refractive surgery. So I think wavefront does have its value to represent in terms of refractive procedures. However, in terms of vision, it's rather difficult to interpret. Let's switch to image plane representations, like the point spread function. So the point spread function is the light distribution on the retinal plane from a point light source that runs through the optical system, is affected by aberrations or scattering, and you get the light intensity distribution in the retinal plane. Now, if you have a point source here, which gives in light through an optical system and forms a point spread function here in the image plane, the point spread function is affected either by diffraction, scattering, or wavefront aberrations. In my presentation, I'm going to focus on wavefront aberrations and not on scattering. So each single point within an image gives you a certain point spread function. And as you see here, it's not a point source anymore. It's getting to be smeared out. It's going to have a kind of a distribution. Now, how is an image formed from an object? Every object consists of a kind of infinite number of point sources, which is transferred through the optical system. Each point source is affected by the optical system, smeared out according to the point spread function, and the image is formed by simply overlapping the single point spread functions. And what we observe is a kind of an envelope here over the single point spread functions that form the image. That's how an image is transferred into the eye from an object to the retina. Okay, let's look a bit on a point spread function. So this would be an ideal point spread function, a very narrow peak, no spreading out of light. A single peak here, very good point spread function, diffraction limited eye, perfect eye. Let's add a little bit of defocus, a little bit of sphere. You can see the point spread function starts to get larger, smeared out. Half a diopter, it's getting larger. Now the question is, which gives you the best image? Remember, smaller the point spread function, more quality of image. I think it's already, this one is pretty clear that this is going to have a bad image. It's going to be more understandable that what is going to be the vision quality. Let's talk a little about of contrast. Now contrast, we have a sinusoidal function here with a bright light here and no light here, which is also transferred through the optical system. And what happens is that you get a difference here in the contrast, and sometimes you can also observe phase shifts. Well, this is a kind of a very mathematical scheme. Let's go a little more into practical. If you look on such a stripes here, white and black ones, it has a kind of a modulation here. This is high intensity, low intensity. And this goes through the optical system of the eye. You get the kind of grayish shifts in here. You get a kind of change in the modulation, and you get these gray values in here between. So you're losing the contrast between the edges. Now, looking at the picture, and this is actually the Victoria Jungfrau. It is one of the biggest mountains in Europe. And what you can look at this picture, you can see a kind of different spatial frequencies. Spatial frequencies are modulations in the image over a given distance. So a very low spatial frequency basically means you can see three mountains, 1, 2, 3. And you have high frequencies, which are the fine details in an image. Probably here the ice in the mountain. These are the fine details having a high spatial frequency. Usually wavefront aberrations affect the higher frequencies more than the lower frequencies. So you get a reduction in the contrast. And if you look at the picture now, you still can see that there are three mountains, but we completely lost the fine details. We lost the higher frequencies. And that's actually the concept of a modulation transfer function. Plotting this in terms of frequency versus modulation, you get these typical point spread function, modulation transfer function figures. You notice a clinician in terms of contrast sensitivity measurements. Contrast sensitivity charts are usually designed similar. You have the spatial frequency here and the contrast here. And testing your eyes, you typically should observe the kind of a threshold value here for the contrast versus the spatial frequency. That's what you're doing in contrast visual testing. This is an ideal modulation transfer function for a diffraction limited eye. We're going to add a little bit of defocus. You can see the higher frequencies are already cut off. Again, more defocus here, more higher frequencies are cut off. Having this knowledge, looking at the pictures of the modulation transfer function, we need to look which of those 5 MTFs is transferring the image best, which means which one has the highest component of higher frequencies. And I think that's getting more easy now, the middle one. See, it has a quarter large broad range here of higher frequency included. Pretty similar if you look at the 3D-dimensional situation here. There's a larger spread out here, and you get a better image here. So wavefront data representation do not only use high-order aberrations for your decisions, because aberrations can be balanced. Most of the pictures I've shown you here, giving the best image, is a combination between spherical aberration and defocus. And it's possible that an eye can have a lot of spherical aberration, but adding the adequate amount of sphere, you probably get a good visual performance. So aberrations can be balanced between. I think MTF, PSF are much better related metrics to look at visual performance. And I have my doubts to use RMS values for statistical analysis. They can be misleading in terms of how to interpret these data for your clinical results. Let's talk a bit about aberrations of a normal eye. If you look at the face, the face has a kind of symmetry, a mirror symmetry along the nose. And this is also true for astigmatism. We know that for a long time. And also it was found to be present in wavefront aberrations. Typical coma and spherical aberrations are pretty similar in both eyes. This is kind of an example. Here, spherical aberration, both eyes is very similar, and they have a kind of a mirror symmetry. So sphere and cylinder are known to have a high mirror symmetry. Most of the higher order aberrations demonstrate also a mirror symmetry when comparing right and left eyes. And fourth order spherical aberration and third order vertical coma were found to have the highest correlation. Aging is always a topic when talking about aberrations. We know the eye is changing with age, and especially starting in the age of 40, we're getting slightly presbyopic, and this is going to increase over time. But what happens with the aberrations? Two different studies, either from Guriao as well as from Doug Koch, and they looked either on the Strel ratio as well as on the RMS value, and looked at the correlation between age. In fact, there was in both studies very significant correlation between the change in the aberrations and age, either for the Strel ratio measured with a double pass system or the RMS value measured with the Hartmann-Shack. However, if you look at the scatter, there's a lot of scatter in the data, individual scatter, and in fact, the correlations were significant. However, the correlation ratio was pretty small. So the increase with age is pretty weak, and only 10% of the variation in the correlation between age and the high order aberrations can be explained by age. So the R-squared value was typical in the order of 0.1. However, there's a significant correlation, and the major factor that is changing is spherical aberration. Looking at the MTF, there was also found that with increasing age, the MTF is reduced, the higher frequencies are cut off, or again, two different studies found a similar outcome. Here, older patients have a reduced MTF, even in terms of wavefront aberrations. Scattering is not included here. Looking at the sensitivity function of the eye, of the retina, the resolution, we can kind of find a cutoff frequency here for the MTF, and what we also can observe is that there's a kind of calculated reduction in visual performance in terms of visual acuity. So 40 cycles per degree accounts for about 1.2 in the visual acuity. So even with age, the visual acuity is slightly reduced. Just as a remark, if you take the area, the normalized area under the MTF, this is also accounting for the Strel ratio, and can be also looked at in different ways in terms of a correlation with visual performance. If you take the visual acuity with age, calculated from the modulation transfer function as well as measured in normal eyes, we can observe in patients going older than 50 to 60 years a difference. So wavefront aberrations overestimate the visual performance in older patients, most probably due to scattering. So looking at the MTF, looking at the MTF here in the younger group, as well as in the older group, there's a certain percentage, especially in the higher frequencies, where we lose visual performance due to scattering. And this scattering effect cannot be measured by usual wavefront sensors. So if you do a wavefront measurement in a patient above 40, maybe 50, you completely overestimate the visual performance or the optical performance by the wavefront sensor because we're ignoring scattering. So wavefront sensors overestimate the optical performance of the aging eye. Scattering seems to reduce mainly the higher order components, and thus patients might be able to have a 20/20 visual acuity in terms of wavefront operations, but scattering can reduce the contrast sensitivity significantly. So what is the origin of the optical aberrations? And I'm going to refer to Jack Holliday because he was talking for a long time about eagles and frogs. Now, there's a lot of discussion going on that the cornea is an aspheric surface. Aspheric surface means that there's a change of the radius of curvature from the central part of the cornea to the peripheral part. And especially refractive surgery has developed all kinds of treatment modalities and ablation profiles to incorporate the corneal asphericity into the calculation of treatment profiles. And it was also found that if you use a normal myopic correction based on Madelung equation, you kind of create spherical aberration. And people tried to explain whether this spherical aberration observed after a refractive surgery procedure is due to the ignorance of the corneal asphericity. Now, the question is, how important is the corneal surface in terms of the whole optical concept? So, how much is the corneal asphericity affecting really the higher order aberrations? Well, talking about the corneal asphericity, this is a distribution of the corneal aspheric value. And the Q value just more or less represents how fast does the corneal curvature change from the central part to the peripheral part. So as higher the Q value, as there's a faster change within the corneal surface. So the central part, usually in the prolate cornea, has a steeper area where it goes flatter to the periphery. Now, what is the role of the intraocular structure in all this discussion? I mean, looking at corneal topography, we only get an information about the shape. However, visual performance is mainly affected by the total aberrations. We looked at the Q value of, I think, somewhere 500 eyes versus the spherical aberration of these eyes. And there is a kind of a significant correlation between the corneal asphericity and the spherical aberration. However, look at the scatter. There's a lot of effects affecting spherical aberration that is not from the cornea. So somehow the internal structures seem to affect the balance between the corneal asphericity and the intraocular structures. There's a significant correlation. However, we have extremely large scatter in the data set, and this is probably due to the impact of the intraocular structures. We looked on the Q value in terms of what is the best Q value for each patient to achieve a zero spherical aberration. How does this affect it? And therefore we used a ray tracing model. We incorporated pentacam measurements as well as wavefront measurements and biometry measurements in the calculation process and raised the question, can we kind of compensate the spherical aberration with the Q value? And as a matter of fact, doing this simulation, we figured out that there isn't a specific Q value for an average population. So the point is that the corneal asphericity has to be individualized in terms of how it can compensate the total spherical aberration. And this leads to the concept that the corneal surface based on corneal asphericity and corneal curvature is for sure the major refractive element. However, the intraocular structure have a rather large importance, especially when talking about aberrations, especially talking about spherical aberration. So when talking about refractive procedures incorporating corneal asphericity or aberrations, it is important that mean values do not really represent the situation we have in a larger population. We really have to use individualized eye models. So, kind of summary, we found that astigmatism and coma-like aberrations have the major origin from the cornea. There's the primary effect. The spherical aberration is a result of the natural balance between the wavefront errors of the cornea, mainly the asphericity, and the intraocular structure, mainly the lens. And any surgery procedure that does kind of affect this natural balance between the cornea and the intraocular structure will lead to an increase in spherical aberration or other aberrations. So in summary, wavefront maps and Zernike coefficients are ideal for representing wavefront shapes. Visual performance should be compared, I think, mainly in a plane matrix, or image plane matrix like Strel ratio, MTF, or point spread function. Wavefront measurements overestimate the optical performance of the eye because scattering is not considered. In young subjects, the corneal aberrations are compensated by the internal structures. If you get older, the lens is changing, and this also affects the compensation of the intraocular structure. So there is a significant correlation between the aberrations, change in aberrations with age. However, as we have seen, the statistical relevance is pretty low. And an explanation for this degradation of the optical quality we observe with age is probably the loss of the natural balance in the eye between cornea and lens. So coming back to Jack Holliday, I think we're not talking about frogs and eagles, we're talking about frog eagles. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you very much for the contribution. We're well ahead of schedule, well on time. And so there is the question time, 2-3 minutes. If there are any questions now for the speaker, please go ahead. There's one question, yes, please go ahead. Come to the microphone.
The question is spherical aberration and key values. I understood that you measure spherical aberration from the entire eye. My question to you is, if you consider key value and the spherical aberration only from the cornea, would you make a comment on this? The correlation between spherical aberration measured from the cornea, not from the entire eye, and the key value.
So the question was, if you measure more or less or determine the spherical aberration only from the cornea and compare this to the Q value. In fact, there's a mathematical combination between that. So the Q value, or using the Q value, you can recalculate the spherical aberration of the cornea, and then there for sure is a correlation.
So basically, they are the same measure.
To some degree, they're more or less the same value.
Okay, so you are just saying that you cannot correlate key value from the cornea and the spherical aberration from the entire eye. What makes sense?
Yes, we tried also to recalculate the spherical aberration from the cornea and correlate it to the spherical aberration of the total eye.
Total eye.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the answer was pretty much the same.
Thank you. We'll have the next speaker.